and maybe the highest of natural rights, is because it is precisely reflective of the mechanism by which we move from the stagnation of our dead thoughts into a future that's better than the dead past. And so any society that interferes with that will degenerate into a kind of totalitarian absolutism, and that becomes indistinguishable from hell.
It does. I mean, very interesting. I mean, what you said reminds me of a Quranic verse. It defines believers as those people who listen to the word and follow the most beautiful of that. To be able to do that, you have to listen first, and right, you have to be able to choose that. Exactly. It's a verse in the Quran. I can't remember the number now, but I can send you later the number of it.
But that's a great verse. That's a great idea, because it also touches on the notion of a profound intuition of beauty, and the idea that beauty is an intimation of what is divine. And divine is deep and profound and necessary, and I don't care if you speak about that in secular religious terms. It boils down to the same thing in the final analysis. And to use, I talked with one of Canada's great journalists recently, this man named Rex Murphy, who's a real national treasure, and he's so poetic, and he's a deep admirer of poetry, but also a very practical and down-to-earth person. But his words are beautiful, and part of the reason they have such force is because he is in communion with that beauty, and it shines through everything he does. So and these are non-trivial realities that are being pointed to. We ignore them at our peril.
Exactly, and that is a universalistic outlook, to listen to and learn from everything. And it was there right at the beginning of the Islamic civilization, and that's why Muslims built the House of Wisdom in Baghdad and translated all Greek philosophy into Arabic, which ultimately made its way to Europe through Spain, Muslim Spain. So there was this hunger to learn and appreciate, but that gradually narrowed down. And it's a fact that it has happened. Why it happened, how it happened, there are a lot of theories about it.
It happens all the time.
It happens
all the time. It's a human existential reality for that to happen.
I think it will happen to any civilization at the moment they say we have reached perfection, right? We don't need to learn anything from the outside world. And I see that sort of trend in the Western civilization.
That's the Tower of Babel. That's the Tower of Babel, right?
Yep.
You build a structure and you think it's reached the heights of God. And as soon as you think that, everyone fragments and speaks a different language, and everything descends. And then the next story is the flood. And that's not a bloody accident.
Disintegration, exactly. So by reason, I am referring to this view, universalistic view in early Islam, which believed that morality is universal, ethics are universal. The Quran reminds us and educates us, indicates. I mean, according to Qadi Abdul Jabbar, he said, the Sharia indicates what's right and wrong. The other group said the Sharia constitutes what is right and wrong. So if the Sharia constitutes it, you don't have ethical wisdom beyond that.
My interpretation of the Quran is what defines. Well, you can't have that statement without that implicit belief behind it. That's the problem with that kind of idea. It's like, well, it contains the absolute truth. Well, through whose lens? Well, mine. Well, that's pretty damn convenient for you, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And of course, thinking like that had political advantages. And actually, that's an argument I made in the book. But that narrowed Islamic thinking. It also led to literalism. I mean, blind literalism, because if you don't have accept values outside of the written text, you ultimately become less willing to interpret the text and move away a little bit from the text, because you're bound with it too much. And that literalism is a burning problem, I think, in Islamic jurisprudence today. I mean, a lot of the issues about women's rights in the Muslim world come from a literalist.
It's also a terrible technical problem, right, which the postmodernists grappled with, and which in some sense defeated them. It's because when you read a book, you say, well, where's the truth? Is it in a single word, or is it in a phrase? But the phrase is in a sentence, and the sentence changes the phrase, and then the sentence is in a paragraph, and then, there's a really interesting image online showing the hyperlinked nature of the Bible, which verses refer to which other. It looks like a kind of a rainbow. The Bible is densely hyperlinked because all of it refers to it all refers to other parts of itself, which is part of its depth. But what that means is that while you need the whole thing to interpret each word, You need every paragraph to interpret each sentence. And so how do you know if your interpretation is correct? Well, we believe what the sentence says. It's like, nope, sorry, that's just not going to do. And what do you mean by literally true? And are you so sure that literal truth is the deepest form of truth? Because I don't think it is. There's fictional truth. And that's deeper than literal truth, obviously. So
there's certainly, and we have that in Islam, the interpretation of the Quran by the Quran. So you read it's Surah 2 something and you read 57 something else, and they actually explain each other. That's a very powerful approach. By literalism, I mean, I can give you one example on women's rights, for example, which is, of course, a burning issue in certain parts of, not all, but certain parts of the Muslim world today. You may have heard that, Saudi authorities didn't allow women to drive cars for a long time. And finally, when it was allowed, it was a big reform. And the autocratic prince who did that, got a lot of brownie points in the West, although
it was probably a bigger reform than was even recognized.
It was a big reform for them, but the people who demanded were jailed. So it's a weird autocratic form of reform. But then in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, the Taliban came to power. In the 90s, they were not allowing women to even walk on the street, but now they will say we will allow that. Okay, that's a progress for Taliban, but still women will not be able to travel alone. So there is this issue of women traveling alone with a male guardian. I mean, it will come up in all these Islamic issues, conservative Islamic interpretations. Now, where does it come from? Well, it comes from a few hadiths that are sayings reported from Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And it's in Sahih Bukhari, one of the most authoritative, I think, collection of hadith sources, although I would still have some questions there on certain texts. But anyway, there you read Prophet Muhammad saying a Muslim woman should not travel alone without a mahram, that's a male guardian, for longer than a distance of 3 days. Another version is a distance of 1 day. So that's the text. And classical scholars, of course, they thought this was important. They calculated actually what's the difference of 3 days? 78 miles or 57 miles. There are different versions of that. So women should not be able to go. And still today, like in the UK, if you ask a fatwa from a conservative scholars, they can say, can a woman go between Birmingham and London? They can measure the distance. They say, no, it's not more than that distance. Well, that is the textualist reading of this. Now, another reading, which is promoted by Turkish scholars and others, I'm sure, is that, Prophet Muhammad said so probably because in 7th century Arabia, in the desert between Mecca and Medina, there were bandits attacking every unprotected woman. So a woman walking alone without a male guardian